To some extent, almost everyone on Earth is aware of the harmful effects of the sun in aging the skin. Skin aging is divided into four main categories: wrinkles or a change in texture, lack of firmness and skin sagging, vascular disorders, and irregular pigmentation. Over time, sun exposure can single-handedly contribute to all four of these cosmetic flaws. Now, that's not to say that sun exposure isn't good for you. There's a sea of studies that link moderate sun exposure with improved mental health, serotonin release, and better attention spans. In fact, Ahn and colleagues' 2016 paper on sun exposure in the workplace found a significant increase in job satisfaction and a decrease in anxiety when their seating was exposed to some form of direct sunlight as they worked their hours. But that's not what we're here to discuss today. The issue isn't visible sunlight per se, but rather the harmful ultraviolet A and B radiation that sneaks its way through our Earth's ozone layer. Before we talk about wrinkles, here's a quick breakdown of how ultraviolet radiation reacts with our skin. 95% of the ultraviolet rays that reach Earth are UVA. For a while now, scientists have thought that UVA rays were not as harmful because they didn't technically cause skin cancer. But that's like saying guns aren't harmful because they didn't technically kill anyone. Nowadays, we're much more aware that UVA is immunosuppressive and can penetrate deeper into the skin than UVB to create intermediate compounds such as oxygen radicals, which themselves are very reactive and disrupts DNA, thus creating indirect DNA damage. UVB is the higher energy cousin of UVA, which goes directly to the DNA and messes up replication, leading to mutations. Most importantly, both types of rays damage collagen fibers responsible for skin elasticity and reduces vitamin A for skin regeneration. Just look at what the sun does to UV protected plastics. Do you really think your skin will fare much better? Scientists have been trying to quantify photo-induced skin aging, aka sun damage, for years now. How much damage does X amount of exposure per day cause? One way of quantifying skin damage is with the Glogau scale, developed by Richard Glogau. With the skin aging quite linearly for most people, certain regions are more prone to wrinkles than others. For instance, natural indentations that help facial muscles move freely deepen with collagen loss first. Then comes the regions that don't see as much movement or stress, which start to wrinkle as fat compartments sag. Dentofacial bone remodels itself and skin becomes quite lax. In Flamet et al.'s 2013 paper, they used their own method of grading sun damage, from 0 to 8. For the study, they recruited 298 Caucasian women and had a dermatologist rate each face's sun damage to give it a heliodermal score with its correlation to age, i.e., how likely a face of that certain age would be to have this particular cosmetic flaw. As one would expect, older faces have greater instances of sun damage on average as it accumulates over the years. Here's the interesting, significant part though: patients who classified themselves as sun-phobic versus those who are sun-seeking had considerably fewer wrinkles and skin discolorations. Also, the sun-seeking group appeared on average 3 years older than their actual age, with an outlier at greater than 70 years of age, because no one seems to be able to correctly guess your age after that magical point. It's worth noting that both sun-seeking and sun-phobic groups showed similar levels of skin sag, which is predominantly determined by gravity, fat compartments, musculature, and the underlying ligaments, rather than the sun's rays, so this study does appear quite valid. Although this study was conducted on fair-skinned participants, it doesn't imply that darker-skinned people get a free pass to frolic along in the sun. In 2001, Chung et al. Took a look at the aging Korean population, and 19.2% of Koreans with a daily exposure of 1 to 2 hours had wrinkles versus 64.6% of those with more than 5 hours a day of sun exposure. This trend was similar for both genders, but women had a greater chance of developing wrinkles compared to men and saw a sharp spike after 50 years of age. We can't talk about skin tones without touching on melanin. Melanin is a naturally occurring UV-absorbing agent that blocks direct ultraviolet light from reaching the DNA of epidermal cells. I previously explained how UVA rays indirectly cause cancer by creating oxygen radicals, but fortunately, melanin can neutralize these harmful free radicals by scavenging them before they can damage DNA. Being darker skinned is a huge evolutionary advantage for people living in areas with high sun exposure, and it's no surprise that anthropologically, indigenous skin color is correlated with distance from the equator. Unsurprisingly, there's also a correlation between lighter skin populations and higher prevalence of skin cancer, with the major outlier being Australia, attributed to the huge ozone hole in the atmosphere above it. Also, sunlight can encourage the production of freckles, which many find quite unique. Freckles themselves are concentrated clusters of melanized cells, and although some people are genetically predisposed to have them more than others, they only erupt when the skin has been exposed to enough UV rays. They shouldn't be confused with sunspots or liver spots, which may seem like freckles but form only after years of accumulated exposure to the sun. Also, they're larger, more sparse, and an indicator of age, much like wrinkles, whereas freckles are seen in the young and old alike. Freckles can form in people of all skin colors, but are obviously more noticeable in people of lighter tones, with commercial editors going so far as to change the contrast to make them stand out more. There's very little research on how people perceive freckles aesthetically, but modeling seems to fetishize it as a unique skin feature to the likes of vitiligo, albinism, or alopecia, so take from that what you will. If you've ever wondered why black celebrities such as Halle Berry, Pharrell Williams, and Will Smith look well below their age, their melanin-rich skin is part of the reason why. Having higher melanin, or specifically eumelanin, in a darker skin tone better protects the skin from harmful UV rays and thus photo-induced aging. Up to a point, darker skin can basically act as a permanent sunscreen. In fact, Kate B's study showed that darker skin tone had a UVB protection factor of 13.4 versus white skin's 3.4, which is almost 4 times larger. One downside, however, is that black skin is much more prone to discoloration, dark spots, and hyperpigmentation, with the more adverse potential of keloid scarring. Interestingly enough, mixed race skin seems to fare somewhat better in comparison to Caucasian skin tones, which were rated as the worst for aging. Black, Asian, and Caucasian skin tones react to the sun in very different ways. For starters, black and Asian skins don't even produce the same type of melanin, with black skin producing eumelanin and Asians producing pheomelanin, giving them very subtly different skin tones. In a 1990 study by Go on Singaporean Chinese, Indonesian, and Malaysians, the most common sign of sun damage was skin hyperpigmentation, where the skin takes on an uneven tone and sunspots begin to appear. Singaporean participants developed wrinkles more gradually, and even then they were quite fine and unnoticeable. White skin, on the other hand, had both more noticeable dyspigmentation and severe wrinkles. We've already spoken about how excess sun exposure ages white skin in the previous study, but to drive the point home, a separate study from Arizona, USA, found women getting more than 12 hours per week of sun exposure appeared 5 years older on average by objective ratings than those with less than 2 hours per week. Darker skinned people, on the other hand, had a significantly lower incidence of all the adverse effects seen in their fair-skinned counterparts. Although darker skinned people have an overall delayed onset of wrinkles, they can also develop wrinkles in the same manner as any other skin type. The most common feature of sun damage in black skin were fine wrinkles, changes in skin texture, and hyperpigmentation, which in excess can create an uneven, darkened skin tone. Black skin loses relatively less dermal volume with age, which minimizes skin sagging. A good example of this are nasolabial folds, which form with fat ptosis. We're working with practicing medical doctors to do a full write-up over at the KU's site, with a focus on aesthetics. We're also working on a tool that can diagnose facial flaws for clinicians and you alike to use. But I don't want to give away too much just yet, so follow us on Instagram and Twitter to stay up to date. So to summarize this absolute barrage of information, you shouldn't be actively avoiding the sun, as that'll only hurt your mood in the short term. But if you look like Robert Pattinson in Twilight Breaking Dawn, it's best to keep in mind just how much unprotected sun exposure you've gotten for the day. Even the best of sunscreens don't work perfectly, either by you misapplying it rubbing off without you noticing, or it simply not being strong enough, as is the case in certain parts of the world. How well your skin will age does depend on its pigmentation, with black being the best and white Caucasian tones being the worst. Asian, black and Caucasian races have different types of melanin that reacts to the sun in different ways. Over time, this can result in a wide variety and severity of skin lesions which can accumulate on your skin with sun exposure. I'd like to give special thanks to Dr. Sony Sherpa for helping us with the script and reading over everything to make sure it's factually accurate. This is just one of the ways that we're working to improve video quality and production value at the KU's studio.